Well, greetings all. I wanted to take this week to fulfill a promise I made in week 3, which was to share the results of the experiment that you conducted, because I believe they will give us insight about a widespread misconception about learning that the readings cover this week, specifically about learning styles. So to do that, I wanted to draw upon first of all, that experiment, or the results of the experiment that you guys conducted, but also the disjunctive reasoning example from the Stanovich article in week 4. So with week 3's experiment, you may recall that you had asked participants to recall words from 2 lists. The first list contained random words such as tulip, table, pony, Russia, but also an action list where you ask them to act out the words such as cough, clap, stretch, I think gargle is one of those words, etc. And so I just wanted to present the data here. Thanks to Sasha and also Stacia, we had 25 cases, and the rest of you as well. Thank you so much for participating in this. But if you just eyeball the data, you'll see in the random list that they're mostly single-digit responses. There are a few exceptions, but mostly single digits. And if you look at the action list, not quite flipped, but far more double-digit responses, and far more double-digit responses than single-digit responses. So if we look at this just a little bit more closely, there are 3 cases I wanted to point out, largely because it's only 3. Where the recall is higher for the random list than the action list. And I will say that I've conducted this experiment last summer and the summer before, and I think I only have 1, maybe. Of course, smaller N. Again, Sasha did not take the course back then, so yes, that was a smaller group. But still, that is quite striking. So I wanted to look a little bit more closely at this. And before I do, I wanted to also point out that not only in the action item or the action list were there more double-digit items, but we even had like a perfect response from one of Clayton's participants, or from Clayton's participant. So, but to look a little bit more closely and look at the averages here, the mean is almost 2.5 words, actually more than 2.5 words higher for the action list than the random list. And I did run a paired samples t-test, and that is a significant difference. So I think that raises the question, and that is, did you all happen to choose kinesthetic learners? Now, of course, that's possible, but I want you to ask yourself how likely that is. And if it's not likely, if you make that conclusion, then what might the explanation be? Because I think that gives us a little bit of insight in terms of how people learn, and also sheds a little bit of light on the concept of learning styles. So the other example I wanted to touch upon was the disjunctive reasoning example provided by Stanovich in week 4. So you may recall from that that exercise that Jack is looking at Anne, but Anne is looking at George. Jack is married, but George is not. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? Yes, no, cannot be determined. So I will say that you guys read this article. I did not pose this problem to you in a lecture, but I have done that in the past, probably to, I don't know, say 1,000 undergrad students and a handful of graduate students. And Stanovich claims that about 80% of people that are asked this question choose C. It's been my experience that it was, and maybe this is a product of the era, I don't know, but it's been my experience, and it's also partly because it's anecdotal. But I found that between 90 and 95% of everybody that I posed this to choose C. So, so consider that you also probably would have chosen C. I mean, maybe not, but there's, I think, nearly 20 of you in class. Maybe there are 20. Probably, anywhere from 16 to 19 of you would have chosen C. So just kind of keep that in mind. But I also wanted to consider this question if we were to present it differently. It doesn't have to be presented like this. So let's think about a different way to present this. Perhaps a visual way to present it. So we've got Jack, he's looking at Anne, but Anne is looking at George. We know that Jack is married, we know that George is not, but we don't know Anne's status. But as Stanovich pointed out, she can either be married or unmarried. And most of us don't ask that question. This is where we stop. We believe it cannot be determined. So let's look at this again visually. Let's consider these options. So perhaps Anne is unmarried. And then when we revisit this question, the answer is extremely obvious. But she could also be married. But again, the answer is extremely obvious. So again, what does this mean? Does this mean that because this makes more sense to us, that the answer is easier, that we're all visual learners? Or is it something inherent with the task, right? So this is really a question about relationships, and visual information really kind of sort of highlights the congruent or the salient points here, right? That it is about relationships and understanding the relationships that are going on here. So for this week's discussion, what I would like for you guys to do is to answer one of two questions. What do these results tell you about learning and instruction? Or how do the results bridge the gap between what we learned in weeks 1 through 6 and the readings from this week? You may consider the idea of conceptual change, which I think we touched upon also earlier in the course. Why do we resist the idea that learning styles may actually not be a valid construct? So I look forward to your responses this week. Take care.